And welcome to the first of the America and Ideology Politics podcast video things. We're starting with ideology, and the idea we're starting with is the socialist or socialism. The trick to the ideologies module is the fact that most of the questions and most of the focus is about looking at a few core ideas. In socialism case, there's 5 of them. In conservatism and liberalism, there's 6. Understanding what those core ideas specifically are. What does it mean to be class? What does individualism mean in liberalism? What does human fallibility mean in conservatism? And then the questions you'll get are all about how do people, different thinkers and different broad ideological groups, how do they view the idea differently. So how does Marx, Luxemburg, Giddens, etc. view class differently and explain the logic of it? Why do they see class as a different thing? So it's very important going forward and starting, you have a really firm understanding of what the core idea is and what potentials for debates there are. Once you've got that, it'd be very easy to see, oh yeah, Marx is that in the class because it's related to that. So what we'll be doing today is primarily focusing on what does the class mean, but more than that is exploring the logic of the core ideas. So although the stuff written on the screen will be a summary, it's very important you make a note of the stuff we say as well and we go through, as that's just as important to explain the logic and the assumption, because it's very difficult to recognize why does Giddens and Marx disagree on what class is and how does that have an effect, because the essay, particularly the A stars, are about the logic underneath, not just what they say. If everyone can say Marx and Giddens disagree, for a B you can say what they disagree about. For the A and A star, it's about what is the logic, what's the philosophy underneath, what are the assumptions underneath, what's the starting point, the very first point that they start thinking about, which leads to that difference. So the first of the thing we're looking at is the basic outline. Class is a very, very, very important assumption of pretty much all socialists, even on the far right, or relative to socialism, or on the left. What I mean by that is most people don't see class as a policy. It's not, I believe we should do class. Class is something that you assume. You think, okay, obviously there is class, and from there all the other policies come from. That's very important. It's not like believing that there should be welfare. That's a policy you believe in. Okay, class is something you assume. You assume there's humans. You assume that the world should be fair. You might assume that people are good. You might assume people are bad. Whatever you assume, that's where everything else, what your political beliefs about tax, what your political beliefs about welfare, all come from. And class for socialists is an assumption. All socialists assume there is a thing called class, and that leads to them thinking all sorts of other things. Okay, so while there is this agreement that there is something called class, and we'll talk about what precisely makes a class, there is actually a huge disagreement, and this is where the essays will come in, about class itself. What is class? What defines it class? What makes someone middle class? What makes someone working class? Is there a bourgeoisie? Is there a petty bourgeois? Or is that rubbish? As well as that, how important is class? Some people will say, yeah, you can be born working class, but actually it doesn't make too much difference on your life. Others will say you were born working class, and that's the most important thing to affect what you are like, what you think, how you act. You have no independent thought, really. You were born in a working class area, so you will think this, and this, and it's inevitable. As well as that, some people will say, because there are different classes, they will naturally hate each other. They're in competition. This is obviously a more extreme left-wing belief. Others who are looking to be a bit more centrist and also a bit less radical will say, well, no, yes, there is classes, but they're not necessarily in violent competition. There may be competition, but that's healthy. That's how people work hard to become rich and poor, etc. And finally, and very much related to that, some politicians, some theorists on the social side will view class as the only thing which is worth it, most famously Marx. Everything is about class. You cannot understand any politics without understanding class, and you don't need to worry about anything other than class because it's all class. more right-wing, more sort of modern socialists tend to say, yeah, class is important. They all disagree how important, but actually isn't the most important thing. Some will say, in the case of Tony Blair, for example, and the sort of very third way approach, will say class is dead and there's no such thing as class. We're all Mondeo men, women, as it were. So the important thing as we go through this lesson is not to really think, do people agree that there's class or argue there's such thing as class or not? All socialists agree there's class. I would contend that many conservatives and liberals assume there's class as well, but they disagree about all the other stuff about what you should do about it. Okay, so we're going to be focusing primarily on the debates. So, what do we mean by class? Now, simply, you can say a class is a way of categorizing people. It's how you work out who is what and who is working class and who is of a certain wealth. It's basically about a hierarchy. It's about ordering. And I would say pretty much everyone buys into that. You may not call it class, but we do innately, internally rank people and rank ourselves and work out where we are. And you can say that's a profoundly human thing. Socialists go a bit further, though. For them, class isn't just about a label that we give other people. Class is something that affects you as well. What their argument is, human nature, something that one of those core 4 themes, is that actually you are profoundly affected by your social surroundings. So if you are born in a working class mining community, raised by working class parents, went to local working class school, went to work in the pit with around the working class people, what you think is right and wrong, what you like, what you dislike, what your opinion of people is, what your opinion of things is, will be the same or really, really, really affected by those who are around you. So you haven't come to your opinion that you don't like the rich as a miner in Durham because that's what you thought as an independent person. You were born, you reflected on things, you either were naturally born with this opinion or you went away on your own and you had a complete logical thing. It's what you were taught from the people around you. That basically means, therefore, that actually people are shaped by their class. So class isn't a way of describing things. Class is also something which affects and changes and makes people a certain way. So you are born middle class and you are born and raised and experience life a certain way, and therefore all middle class people, there will be differences in exactly how your parents raised you, differences in your experience at school, at work, but ultimately there is a common way of viewing the world, thinking what's right, wrong, which is true to middle class people because they've had basically the same thing. The best example is think of upper class people. They go to boarding schools, or traditionally at least, they were taught how to dress, how to speak, how to act as much as they were in subjects. What's happened is you are a member of the upper class, you go to school, you're raised by upper class parents who teach you to act in very upper class ways to show that you're different from the poor. And that has affected how you view the world. You are raised from day one to think that you are born to rule and that you're better than others. That's a very crude generalization of the upper class, but let's just go run with it for now. Okay? You are born that. Therefore, it's not an accident that, like everyone else from that ruling class, at least the socialists say, you will assume that. Okay, so let's go that once more. It's very easy to get, but very hard to truly understand. Class is not simply a label. Everyone, even liberals and conservatives, will use class as a label. Class is the idea that you have groups of people who have similar experiences, similar surroundings, similar family building, similar work experiences, who all therefore have basically the same view. Okay, and there are groups who have working classes who all live in poor areas, in working class communities, working class parents who all therefore have the same rough view on war, on the same rough view on the rich, the same rough view on whatever. Same thing for middle classes. They have a completely different view, but they've all been raised in the same way. They might go to grammar schools, private schools. They may be introduced to the same sort of pursuits, and therefore they have the same rough view. They may disagree about certain things of the world. And it's profoundly different to that of the working classes and profoundly different to that of the upper classes. And the same thing for them. So if you're trying to imagine the world as a socialist in class, you are saying that there is a society of different layers based on their socioeconomic situation, how rich they are as society. Okay, different layers, all of whom have more in common with other people in their class than the people above or below them. So if you're a middle class person, you have the same basic opinions, they're much more in common with other middle class people than anyone who's working class or upper class. So it's like banding. Look at the world like bands. If you want to show off for the A star, you can say that this is all informed by their materialist worldview. A materialist is someone who argues against individualism to some extent. Individualists say humans have their own destiny, they think for themselves, and therefore people pick what their life's going to be like, they pick what they're going to do. Materialists disagree. Materialists say actually a lot of what people think is affected by the world around them. And because of that, people who are poor will think a certain way. People who are rich will think a certain way. People who are raised in certain cultures will think one way, other cultures the other. Certain religions in certain cases are one way or other. So the idea that who you are isn't because you woke up one day and you've charted your own course. It's because the world around you have made you who you are. Actually, even the most right-wing amongst you may find that you agree with that to some extent. And so you may think, I'm a conservative, and etc., etc., I'm a liberal, and etc., etc. But you may find actually this idea of class, that actually people's experience based on wealth is different and affects how they view the world. You may say, I agree with that. You may disagree with everything else. You may say, well, so what? Doesn't matter. But you may agree with this basic idea. And this is why, for example, even the most right-wing socialists, the third wayers, will say, yeah, there probably is something called class, and then they say it's not that important, etc., etc., etc. So what are the debates? We're going to go through a couple of debates, and the point of these isn't so much that you learn the debates. We're going to go through all the debates again when we come to the different thinkers and the different sort of ideas. This stuff is more so you get an idea about what does class mean. Okay, and you can't really understand class. There's no one set thing of class. Not one set thing at all. Every socialist has a different opinion. So what is almost the band? What is the most classiest class thing and the least classiest class thing that socialists believe? That in that gap is the essay question. So the Marxists, the most extreme left wingers, who we're going to look at later, believe that class is almost entirely based on economic thinking. Okay? i.e., you don't have to worry about your culture, you don't have to worry about religion, you don't have to worry about the area you grew up, you don't have to worry about your history, your race, your gender. Okay? They look at how much money you have, your economic situation. Okay? Particularly, do you work for someone else to make money? Or do you have money in a business, which made you make a business or whatever, which allows you then to make more money? Okay, I'm going to talk about that in a second. So it's based on the economic principle. Now, obviously, some Marxists will say, well, actually, no, it's a little bit of culture, but a little bit of race. But for the most extreme end of this, will say it's all about money, that nothing else matters. It's an illusion. Yeah, it's just about either how wealthy someone is, or even more basic, does someone own the means of production or do they not? So what do I mean by that? You'll look at a second sub-bullet point. In the most crude terms, and this is very Marxian, you can say the world is divided into proletariat and the bourgeoisie. The proletariat are the workers, if you want to be really crude, working class, and the bourgeoisie, if you want to be even more crude, the middle class brackets, upper class. And the simple thing they say is, what determines what class you're in is, do you own capital, do you own money, which is used then to make more money? So do you own loads of money and you made a business? Do you own loads of money and you're a stockbroker? Okay. Do you own loads of money and that's giving you a qualification, that's giving you something which then means you can work for yourself? So you've paid to become a lawyer and now you work as a lawyer for your own business. Yeah, not necessarily about factories. That makes you a bourgeoisie. Yeah. Proletariats do not own money. They do not own what they call the means of production. They have to work for someone else to get their money. So they give their labour, they give their work, in return for money, and that's how they live. So, for example, a factory owner is the bourgeoisie. The factory worker is the proletariat. The lawyer is the bourgeoisie. The legal clerk who does, or the secretary, is the proletariat. Very economic based. We're going to go through this lots more when we look at Marxism. Don't worry too much. Now, some people might say that's too simple. And actually, there should be more classes. Yeah? I disagree that we should basically simply make it proletariat than bourgeoisie. Because there's a huge difference between a lawyer and a factory owner. And also, what happens to the super rich people? Where they fit in? Are they the same as a teacher? Okay, and where does a teacher fit in this? So they break it up. They say, well, we say there's the working class and the peasantry. Working class are the proletariat in the cities. Peasantry are the proletariat in their land. And they're very different, and they have very different opinions. If you're in the countryside, you're more traditional, you're more conservative, you're more sort of old-fashioned in many ways. Working classes tend to be more politically extreme, a bit more progressive, and a bit more unified. Okay, a bit less religious. So they say, well, you can't say they're both the same thing. Let's separate them. As well as that, they can say, well, the bourgeoisie, with a random capitalisation there, that covers too much. That covers someone who's a small business corner shop owner to someone who owns half of London. And actually, you should say the bourgeoisie is the middle class, and then you have an upper class who own land, who own huge businesses. Even more people will say, no, that's completely untrue. Yes, you've got the working class and you've got the peasantry, but actually the middle class aren't the same. You've got people who are technically middle class. Okay, they work with stuff they've learned, but they're not hugely well paid. And they have a very different, so a barrister might have a very different experience of the world than a teacher, but a very different experience of the world than someone who is a plumber, for example. And the idea, therefore, you must have difference is within that. Lower middle class, upper class, and then you also have the upper class. So in reality, even people who say, yeah, it's about money, it's about how much they earn, it's about their job, it's about their socioeconomic status, they disagree about, well, okay, fine, we agree. Where are the lines? Where are the categories? What are the categories? Okay? There are some other things as well. More right-wing, more modern socialists say, actually, culture, education matters as much for class. And this fits in non-fitting occupations. Is a policeman a working class person or a middle class person? Working class people say no, he's not a middle class person. Working class person, middle class person will say he's not. Is a teacher, a very common one, which is not. Often teachers will earn less than a plumber or an electrician. But most people will say, when they're thinking about it, teachers are probably more middle class than plumbers or electricians, despite the fact they're paid more. So actually, is it just about money? Or is it the fact that middle class teachers have had a university education, they are part of a bit more of a liberal culture, arguably, than a sort of mass culture as the stereotype of an electrician or plumber, which is almost certainly not true. That's a crude generalisation, but you get the idea. So actually, you can't just say, oh, it's about their money, and just look simply what's their pay, look great, oh, this is where they are. You have to go, well, yes, that's how much they earn, and that's important, because that leads to culture, etc. But are they going to the opera? Are they interested in classical music? Do they go to private members clubs? Oh, they must be an upper class person. Okay. Do they go to the betting shop, for example? That's a really crude generalization. So actually, how people behave, what they do, their culture, their social views, actually many socialists say that makes as much or as, if not more of a difference. And again, it's really important. Where do pensioners fit? Pensioners don't earn any money at all, but are they working class? Well, they're technically not working. Okay, where do people who are unemployed fit? They've got a very different experience to working classes. So in reality, a lot of debates are saying, well, these categories are really crude and really simple. Okay, and loads of people have taken loads of different attempts to try and define what different groups in society are. And as time has gone on, we've got better, normally because we've got more and more categories, so it's can reflect more and more different types of people. But in reality, you can never, there's not an answer unless you have every possible category for every possible person, which is then pointless. Because in reality, life is more complex, society is more complex than saying people have one of four worldviews. Yeah, you can't say that every working class person hates the rich. Every working class person is oppressed. Every middle class person hates the working class. It's too simplistic. And so a lot of debates, particularly the criticisms of the Marxist view, is actually this whole thing about class, this definition based on sort of basing the idea of money is really rubbish because it doesn't cover it. And as well as that, related to the next bullet points, it's pointless. Is this helpful? Or should we start thinking of the world in different ways by like race, region, gender, etc., etc.? So the next debate is about how important class is in individuals' worldviews and lives. Now, as mentioned, the Marxists, everyone agrees that class affects people's views of life. Everyone agrees. Yeah. If you are raised in a working class world, you will have a different worldview, a different attitude, and different experiences, education, opportunities than had you been born the exact same brain, exact same genes in a middle class family. But the debate is how much does it have an effect? Now, naturally, the Marxists argue that they are determinists. This basically means your situation completely defines who you are and who you are not. So, for example, they say you are born in a middle class person. You are basically entirely a product of your family, the local area, and where you happen to be, all of which is dependent on being middle class. And if you had been born a blank slate in a working class or upper class area, you would be fundamentally different. They also say, therefore, because all the working class people have the same experience, roughly, they all have the same basic views. They might disagree on specifics, but they all want to control the means of production. They all are oppressed. They all hate the rich. The Social Democrats are the third ways, and if you not quite aware of this, we're going to cover in much more detail, but if you're thinking at the most extreme left wing is Marxist, in the middle is Social Democrats, and almost basically liberal, far less socialist, and they don't like to be called socialists, the third way socialists, are on the right. So the Social Democrats and third way argue that actually, you are affected by your surroundings and you are affected by that sort of stuff. But in reality, you still have some control. So you can be born working class, but that doesn't necessarily mean you'll always be working class or you'll think a certain way. Some people will work harder, some people will come up with a business, some people will be criminals. And therefore, actually, yes, all working class people have the same basic starting point, but how people use that starting point is different. In particular, the third way is really focused on this. They say, there are working class people, but actually it's really not important to them. It may affect the background of them, and it may have a little effect, but actually if they work hard, if they're someone who is a good person and they are well raised, etc., 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 and they have a good moral core and they're clever by biology, then actually it doesn't matter. They can still make it. They can still become Alan Sugar, essentially. Okay, well, worth knowing, Alan Sugar is a third way-ish person. Okay, next one. Related to this, therefore, is how important to understand politics and to do politics is class. So the Marxists say you can't understand politics without understanding class. And likewise, if you are not dealing with class, what are you doing? Class is politics, politics is class, therefore the only thing to worry about and make policy on and focus on is class. The Social Democrats and third way disagree. Okay, they say yes, it's important. Okay, it's important to understand class and that sort of stuff's very useful. But in reality, not everything politics is about class. There is race, there's gender, there is stuff outside of class, there's regional things. And in reality, there are reasons people do stuff and there are stuff to fix which aren't about class and cannot be fixed by fixing class. The third world in particular really say class is not a massively helpful way to view politics. Yeah, yes, they recognise, it has an effect, but you should always view and deal with politics not by worrying about class, but by worrying about other things. Yeah, so if you wanted to fix poverty, rather than going, we should help working class people, which is a social democratic thing. So we need to. There is class, we need to deal with it. You go, we'll do something to help with poverty. We'll make better schools, but we won't target classes. We'll help everyone the same. To some extent. As well as this, there is a debate about, because there are different classes, what's their relationship? The Marxists say there can only be one class in charge. And in fact, if you really want to be smug, you can say they used to believe that the ruling class under feudalism, that's the medieval thing, were in charge, and then there was the Industrial Revolution, and there were loads of revolutions, such as the French Revolution in the 1790s, and then the bourgeoisie took over, and then they had control. But then, as a result, they oppressed the proletariat, and now the proletariat, the next thing that will inevitably happen is they want control, and therefore there will be another revolution. So the Marxists see revolution as inevitable. That classes will never share, classes will never join, and there's always going to be competition, and the one in charge will always dominate. Social Democrats do not see class conflicts as inevitable or particularly strong. Obviously, the third way is more lenient about conflict than the Social Democrats, but they say Social Democrats say, yeah, there is conflict between classes, but it doesn't have to be violent, and the state can get involved and sort of make life easier and sort of bring the classes closer together so there's not conflict. The third way say, actually, the classes aren't that necessarily fighting, and in reality people can easily ignore classes and work from there. So coming back to and sort of summarising, the third way say classes conflict is, obviously when people have different things they're going to be in competition, but actually competition isn't bad, and actually the differences in class can be used to encourage people to work harder. Quite a right-wing view, and so while the state should probably make it so that people can transcend classes and people should be able to move classes, actually you can make the competition individual rather than about whole people. So rather than working class people hate middle class people and that's permanent, third way say, well, actually they don't automatically hate them, they kind of want to join them, and so they will try and work harder, make businesses, etc. And the government should try and encourage that and make it easier for people to go from working class to middle class to upper class. We call that social mobility. So to recap, Marxists, all the classes will naturally hate each other. There'll be naturally violence, there's going to be natural revolution, there's nothing you can do about it. Social Democrats, yes, there is a lot of difference in classes and that can lead to a lot of resentment and violence, but you can avoid that by using the government to narrow the differences between the classes and make life fairer. The third way say, there's difference in classes and there's probably a bit of competition, but it's not really violence, and actually it can be used, differences in classes, to encourage people to work harder and reward those who work hard through social mobility. So long as the government make it, for example, having a good education system, by making it so that anyone can become better and wealthier through social mobility. So also that's very similar to a liberal view there. So, the last couple of debates. Number one, what is the role of the state? Now this is weird, because your default is to go more left-wing, bigger state. Actually, it's not quite that way. This is one of the few ones where the Marxist and third way have slightly more in common. The Marxists say the state is inherently bad. It's a necessary evil, but it's inherently bad. This is because whoever is in control, whichever class is in control, will use it to repress someone else. So, apologies for the interruption. We'll do that point again. The Marxists view the state, whoever is ruling class will use the state, use the government to repress everyone else and keep itself in power. So the state is bad. However, this is the big star thing, they do recognise that they need the state in the short term. So if there's a revolution, there's a danger there won't be any classes. There's danger what they want to happen won't happen. So what they say is, okay, we'll have a state, we'll use it to do the good things. So for example, what they want is to completely get rid of class by making everyone the same class and equal. And then once that happens, you won't need the state anymore, and therefore it can get rid of. Okay, so the Marxists say the state is bad because it inherently leads to people abusing it, which actually is fairly prescient for those of you doing Russia. But we'll use it in the short term to make the society as we want it, make it equal, make there to be common humanity, all the stuff we're going to go through, make the world classless, and then we'll get rid of the state. Social Democrats profoundly disagree. They see the state as very positive, particularly Social Democrats. They say classness is bad and it exists, but the state is actually the key thing to rearrange it and can keep doing it. So both Marxists and Social Democrats believe that the state can be used to make life fairer. Social Democrats don't want to destroy class, they want to just narrow the classes and the difference between rich and poor, so there's not so much of a difference, so there's not so much conflict. But the Social Democrats say this is permanent. So we should always have a strong, big state, and we should never think about getting rid of it, because we can just constantly use it to keep the situation fairer and more equal, if not totally equal. The third way, similarly say, okay, actually the state can be used to make the negative effects of class. So, for example, working class people might have less exposure to quality education, so therefore the state should provide better education, so that if they have better education, they can become middle class or upper class by qualifying as a doctor, a lawyer, making a business, etc., and working their way up to classes from there. But generally, being third way, being a bit more right wing, they tend to also say there's only so much the state should do, though. The Social Democrats will try and make much more change to society, much more taxing, much bigger welfare, much bigger stuff than the third way, who kind of want to make it fairer without taxing too much or changing too much, or not, and still allowing business to be there a lot and not making too much change. Okay, so the state fundamentally changes. As well as that, and these are the last couple for a bit of reference to what I think. How different people and different socialists explain change and why society changes is different. Naturally, Marxists say society it completely changes because of the battles between classes. Okay, change in history is only about, and if you're a historian, the Marxist historiography says all change, everything from Hitler to Nahm to Mr. Rain's poor life choices, can be explained by socio-economic factors. And that's it. Whereas Social Democrats and more so third way people say actually other things cause historical change. The individual decisions of people, race, culture, geography, the previous history, all that has an effect on what happens in history, and therefore if we want to change the world in the future, we should think about if we want to change the world. So, for example, we want to make the world fairer, and Marxists will say, well, all change is about class, so if we want to make the world fairer, we will change the classes, so there's no class. A third way person or a social democrat might say, yes, but actually that doesn't help women. So we need to do something outside of class to help women. That doesn't help ethnic minorities who are historically underrepresented. We need to do something different. We need to do affirmative action. We need to have rules against discrimination. That's not actually about class, but they think is important. As well as that, there's a big argument about, okay, we all agree there's class. What should we do about it? It's the bottom bullet point. So, the argument can be essentially that, okay, we all agree there's class. Marxists say because there's class and because it's so inherently unfair and so leads to violence, except all the things we've mentioned, because of all of that, we need to transform society to completely get rid of class at all. Third way people or social democrats say, yeah, we agree there's class, but actually we don't agree that we need to get rid of class. We just need to narrow the difference between working classes and upper classes. And if rich people earn slightly less and they're taxed more and their money is used to make life of working class people slightly better, there's less likely to be violence and society is fairer and more harmonious. Third way go even further and they say, yeah, there's class, but actually in reality we shouldn't worry too much about it. We should worry about making everyone's life better. We should worry about, particularly rather than trying to change class, giving people an opportunity to leave their class and become richer through education, through aspiration and that sort of stuff, and punishing them if they don't and they're lazy by not giving them nice things. That's fine as well. So you've got three completely different views on class amongst them. They all agree there's class. Marxists say we should completely get rid of all classes, make everyone one class. Socialists say we should narrow the difference. And third way basically say we shouldn't worry too much about it. Okay? So, let's summarise. What do the Marxists think of all these things? And this will be in much, much more detail in a future lesson. But so think of this as more as helping understand what we mean by class rather than anything else. So, Marxists say the world is completely controlled about class. Class defines everything. It is a determinist thing, and this is because class basically makes people the way they are. If you are born to a X class, you will think this way, and you will all think broadly the same way, as a cohesive unit, as a group together. And therefore, you've got these big groups, and there's a big disagreement on precisely what, of people who are disagree about different things, but inevitably, they will come into conflict, because only one can be on top. Okay? Last two things, obviously at the bottom, they define class by economics and economics only, and they see the state as necessary until a class of society. Big caveat here. There are 100 different opinions within Marxists alone. Some may believe in 90% of this and disagree about economic-based definitions. So, for example, feminist Marxists will agree with all of this, but then say actually it's not just economic class, it's also gender. People will have different agreements on how determinist it is, how much an effect on human nature, whether the state is really bad or not. So Stalin said it actually wasn't too bad. Lenin said it's actually it's all right. Marx said it's very bad. These sort of things. So although this is a broad Marxist view, in reality, you ask 10 Marxists precisely this, they will say broadly this stuff, but they will disagree. Social Democrats, similar. Class, they argue, is important, but is not the only thing affecting people and how they are and their view, etc., etc. Politics, therefore, should take into account class, but not only be about it. It should make policies around and think about how do we affect people's values, how do we reflect people's culture, and that sort of stuff. Okay, they do say yes, the class you are born with has a huge effect on your education, has a huge effect on your worldview, has a huge effect on your values and your morals, but it's not the only thing. So we should allow some individualism. People do allow themselves to do stuff. People aren't entirely helpless. So in reality, although working class people are broadly the same, there is a huge difference between them, and you shouldn't just treat them all the same, and you shouldn't just see it as like fatalist. This is all what's going to happen. There's nothing we can do about it. As well as this, the definitions of class they view as looser. They don't necessarily agree with that it's as simple as middle class, upper class, etc., etc. Okay, and they say conflict is, there'll be conflict between classes, but it can be managed by the state. Yes, the classes will disagree, but if the state makes life fairer, there won't be a revolution. Okay, and therefore, added together, their big thing is we will want to change class so it's narrower together, but rather than completely get rid of class, which will lead to more violence than it's worth. And finally, third wave view. Yes, there is class, but it's not as important as many other things, particularly the fact that people have control over their own affairs. People have agency. That means you have control over your actions and your opinions. So they say, actually, you're born to working classes, but that doesn't mean you are automatically going to be X or you think X. You have a lot of control over it. And therefore class doesn't matter on politics. And while it does affect on human nature, it's not the only thing that affects human nature. Okay? So some people are lazy. Some people are clever. Some people just by the way things are. Okay? And therefore they don't really care much about worrying about what the working class think and middle class think. They think more broadly. Okay? And they don't really worry about conflict, therefore. Okay, the big thing they say, there is such thing as class, it has an effect, but it's not huge. The state therefore should help affect and nullify the bits that class affect. So let's use education again. Working class people might not have the same educational background of their parents, who then therefore they might not learn as much at home, and they might go to working class schools which might not have as good teachers, and therefore they don't have a good education. That is something which is class that many third way people say that's class affecting people's outcomes. Therefore, the government should change education so that it makes up for that. What they don't say, though, is they should completely get rid of private schools. Okay, or there shouldn't be competition for exams. Because how else are you going to make students work hard unless you also have some winners and some losers? People are not just born failures and successes. They need to be encouraged to act in the right way, to not be lazy. Okay? So therefore, while they want to narrow divisions, and not abolish them. Their way of doing it is a bit more right-wing. They care less about the government giving people everything and a little bit more about saying people should also have their own control. So there's often a lot of confusion between third way and social democrats. If you're really crude, just remember it. Third way is more right-wing, smaller government, less tax than the social democrats. But the key difference is individualism. Third way people argue that individuals actually, if you just have a big state, people get lazy, they don't try hard, and it doesn't reward the right people, and therefore the economy suffers and people suffer. What you need to do is, yes, help people have the same starting point. You want to make sure people do not suffer too much, but ultimately you've got to let people work hard. And those who work hard, those who are clever, those who are good, they will succeed, and that's fine. Not everyone should succeed because not everyone deserves to succeed. So obviously many socialists view the third way approach as relatively unsocialist because it's seen as uncaring about the condition of the poor. So, to finish up, what is the story of class? Well, in reality, as time has gone on, attitudes towards class have changed. Particularly, we've gone from a Marxist attitude to a more social democratic and third way attitude. And the reason for it is essentially changing the economy. As the West has gone from largely a population of people who work in factories to people who work in shops and offices, the electorate changes. You go away from working class people to more middle class people. There are much more middle class people, many more middle class people in this century than there were in the last. And because of that, if you are a socialist, you want to get elected, you've got to worry about what the middle class think about. And many middle class people and lower middle class people and upper working class people care less about class and particularly don't want to just give people free stuff because they're lower class. And therefore many socialists and socialist politicians have gone increasingly about trying to make those people happy and therefore said, well, yeah, we'll have unemployment insurance, but not too much. And that's quite popular because most people don't see themselves as ever being unemployed and that only the poor will have unemployment insurance. As well as that, because of changes to our economy, it's hard to talk about working classes, middle class and upper classes. In the old days, if you worked with your hands, you were a working class person. Middle class, you worked in an office and you had an education. Middle class, upper class, if you owned something and you made money from it, you're upper class. In reality, that's changing. There are now far fewer factory jobs. Some people are working in offices but in really low paid jobs. Some people are working in startups. Some people work in the digital age. Some people are self-employed. That doesn't fit. And because of that, people don't really understand and worry about class as much. It's not as obvious who is what class, and therefore people don't worry. There's more jobs like teachers which don't quite fit in this world. Lots of consultancies and that sort of stuff. Okay? What is a corporate lawyer? What is a banker? Is it upper class? They have a lot of money. Yeah, it just doesn't fit. As well as that, what used to happen is people used to be proud and working class and relatively proud and middle class and proud and ruling class or upper class. In reality, I would say that actually, if anything, the upper class culture has shifted the least, but many particularly working class areas and people who grew up in working class areas and had the same community and thought of themselves working class have changed. The jobs have gone. Working class people are not living in the same areas such as the East End of London. There's lots of immigrant communities. There's lots of splitting up of the communities. There's lots of gentrification when middle class people move into those areas. And now there's not a not a working class area. So back in the 1900s, you grew up in the East End of London and you're a working class person. You're surrounded by working class people and you all had the same community and culture. You get your culture from the community. Nowadays, that's not so true. Communities are broken up, communities don't exist, there's people from outside, either different ethnic groups, religious groups, or from different classes have come in. Think of all the middle classes who now live in Shoreditch, for example, which is used to be a very traditional working class area, and it's harder to have we are working class sort of values and mentality because of that. Okay, it is a confusing topic. The hardest thing about this course is understanding the core assumptions. And I've gone into loads of detail here and you will not get all of this fine. That's the point of lessons, to go over this stuff. Okay? Do not worry too much. It's vitally important you ask questions about it. In reality, so long as you can understand all the different points of view someone could have about class, and then we start joining them up with the different thinkers and different ideologies, you're there. So this will not make complete sense for another 10 to 15 lessons when we look at the ideologies and you start going, oh yeah, that's Marx's view. He thinks this about class, but Giddens thinks this. Until then, though, I will see you and have a good afternoon, evening, or good night.